Welcome to the deep dive. We always do things a little differently here, and today is no exception. We're going deep into your sources on anxiety.
Sounds intense.
It is. Honestly, this is one of the most unique perspectives I've seen. Usually, it's all about managing anxiety. But these sources, they suggest something way more radical. They say we can actually overcome it completely.
Yeah, that's a pretty bold claim. Most approaches don't even come close to that.
Right. It's like flipping the script.
Yeah.
So the core idea here, and this is where it gets interesting, is that anxiety isn't a disease, it's a learned reaction.
A learned reaction to discomfort.
Exactly. And, if it's learned, it can be unlearned. That's what these sources are saying.
That's a pretty big if, though.
For sure. For sure. But one of the sources, Understanding Anxiety, actually claims a 95% recovery rate using their method.
95%. Wow, that's a lot higher than what we usually see with traditional treatments.
It really is. It's a staggering statistic.
Yeah,
But the method itself, it might sound surprisingly simple at first.
but the reasoning behind it is actually quite nuanced, yeah.
You're right. The book really goes deep into how our brains work, how they create and reinforce anxiety, through memory and learned responses and all that.
Yeah, and it challenges a lot of assumptions about anxiety.
It does. So let's break this down a bit. What specifically about anxiety? What does this book see differently?
Well, the author, he starts by making a distinction between two types of anxiety, right? You have rational anxiety.
Okay, so the fight or flight we feel when there's real danger.
Exactly, which is, perfectly normal. But then there's irrational anxiety. That's where things get complicated.
So what's the difference?
Irrational anxiety is a learned response. It's triggered by misinterpreting the initial physical symptoms of anxiety.
Oh, I see. So like our body sends us a signal, maybe we get a little tense or our heart rate goes up, and instead of seeing it as a normal stress response, we see it as danger.
Exactly. We misinterpret it. And that misinterpretation is what triggers the fear response.
Yeah.
And then it becomes like a fear of experiencing anxiety itself, self-fulfilling prophecy.
Wow. Okay, that makes a lot of sense. I can see how that cycle could start pretty easily, especially if you don't really understand what's happening in your body.
Right. And the book actually highlights five key factors that contribute to this.
5.
Yeah. So you have misinterpreting the initial symptoms, like we talked about. Then there's the body's natural discomfort response.
Okay, so that's just our body doing its thing.
Yeah. But then there's confirmation bias, where we actually look for evidence to support our fear. And then, of course, the fear of anxiety itself.
Makes sense.
And then finally, the language we use to talk about it.
The language. What do you mean by that?
Well, saying things like, I'm having a panic attack, or my anxiety is really bad today.
Oh, okay. I never thought about it that way.
Right. The book argues that even the way we talk about anxiety can reinforce this belief that it's this powerful force controlling us.
Interesting. So how does the book propose we break this cycle then?
Well, this is where it gets really interesting. The book introduces this method. It's called the I am not sick method.
I am not sick.
Yep. It sounds incredibly simple, but the reasoning behind it goes back to how anxiety forms in the brain. It connects to all that.
Okay. I'm definitely intrigued. Tell me more. How does this I am not sick approach work?
Well, it's based on the idea of challenging those deeply ingrained beliefs about anxiety and interrupting those anxious thought patterns.
Okay.
So the book, it encourages you to repeat the phrase, I am not sick, to yourself, especially when you start to feel anxious.
So it's almost like a mantra, a way to consciously redirect your thoughts.
Exactly. And the book takes it a step further. It suggests using visual reminders as well.
Visual reminders, like what?
Things like posters, notes, even your phone background,
Mm.
all with the phrase, I am not sick, on them.
Okay, I'm picturing someone with sticky notes all over their house now.
Yeah, it might sound a little unorthodox.
It does, but I can see the logic behind it.
Yeah.
It's like, if we're constantly bombarded with messages that reinforce anxiety, why not create our own messages? Messages that promote a different perspective.
That's exactly the idea. It's about consciously changing the narrative that we tell ourselves about anxiety.
Okay, I like that.
Mm.
But how does this I am not sick method actually address those deeply ingrained anxiety memories? Because the book, it seems to really emphasize memory as a key player in how anxiety persists.
You're absolutely right. Memory is a crucial piece of the puzzle. The book explains how our anxiety memories, they're particularly vivid and powerful because they're linked to such strong physical sensations, and a sense of threat.
So those memories kind of become triggers for future anxiety,
Mm-hmm.
making more likely that we'll react in the same way again.
Exactly. But here's the good news. The book also points out that our memories, they're not static. They're not set in stone. They're constantly being reconstructed every time we recall them.
Wait, so you're telling me we can actually change how we remember those anxious events?
That's the idea. It's a concept called memory reconsolidation, and this I am not sick method, it's designed to leverage this, by interrupting those anxious thought patterns and introducing a new narrative.
Okay, my mind is officially blown. I need a minute to process this.
Take your time. It's a lot to take in.
All right, let's dive back in. So if our memories are malleable like that, and this I am not sick method helps us reframe our experience of anxiety, where do traditional treatments fit in? I know the book challenges some of the conventional approaches, right?
It does. It questions the effectiveness of treatments like medication and cognitive therapies, pointing out that they often focus on managing symptoms rather than, addressing the root cause.
Oh, I see. So taking medication might alleviate the symptoms temporarily, but it doesn't necessarily address the underlying fear or those ingrained anxiety memories.
That's the argument the book makes. It suggests we need to go deeper to challenge those fundamental beliefs that fuel the anxiety cycle.
I'm starting to see how this book really connects the dots between memory, learned responses, and our whole perception of anxiety. It's pretty radical.
It is, and it opens up a whole new world of possibilities for overcoming it.
All right, I am ready to go deeper into this I am not sick method. What are the practical steps? Like, how can someone actually use this in their daily life?
Well, we'll definitely delve into all the specifics in the next part of our deep dive.
Okay, great.
But for now, let's just let that idea sink in. The idea that anxiety, it might not be a disease, but a learned reaction that we can unlearn.
This is definitely giving me a lot to think about. I can't wait to hear more about the practical stuff in the next part of our deep dive.
Welcome back to the deep dive. Before the break, we were talking about the I am not sick method, suggesting that anxiety is a learned reaction, not a disease, so we can unlearn it.
Yeah, I have to admit, I'm still wrapping my head around it all. I mean, saying I am not sick, can that really make a difference? It seems, I don't know, almost too good to be true.
I get it. It does sound deceptively simple, right? But the book, it lays out a really compelling argument. It shows how this phrase, combined with some other techniques, can actually, rewire our brains.
Okay, convince me. How does repeating I am not sick actually work? Like, practically, what's going on?
Well, the book gets into the nitty-gritty of it. It breaks it down into a few key mechanisms. So first, it directly challenges that ingrained belief, that anxiety is a sickness. By saying, I am not sick, over and over, you're basically countering that deep-seated assumption. You're introducing a new narrative.
So it's like creating a new belief system, one that sees anxiety as, I don't know, a temporary state, not a permanent condition.
Yeah, exactly. And that shift in perspective, it can be super powerful.
Okay.
Then second, the phrase acts as a thought-stopping technique.
Oh, okay, I see.
So when you feel those anxious thoughts starting to spiral, saying, I am not sick, kind of interrupts that pattern.
It's like hitting the reset button.
Right, exactly. And then third, it promotes positive self-talk, right?
Yeah.
It reframes the whole experience of anxiety. Instead of saying, I have anxiety, or my anxiety is bad, you're affirming your health.
You're not denying the anxiety, you're just changing how you relate to it.
Yeah, exactly. You're acknowledging the feelings, but you're not letting them define you. You're taking back control.
Okay, I'm starting to get the psychology behind it.
Right.
But what about the visual reminders? The book talks about those a lot, right? The posters, the notes, the phone background, all with I am not sick, plastered everywhere. Why are those so important? It seems, I don't know, a bit much.
It might seem that way at first, but there's a reason for it. The book explains how we're constantly bombarded with messages that shape our perception. It happens unconsciously, right? Advertisements, news headlines, social media, they all feed into the narratives we create.
It's like we're programmed by our environment.
Exactly. So with the I am not sick method, you're consciously reprogramming yourself.
It's like hacking your subconscious.
Hmm.
But how often do you need to see these reminders for them to actually work?
The book suggests putting them in places where you tend to feel anxious. Like if you get anxious in the morning, put a poster on your bathroom mirror.
So you can't miss it.
Right. Or if it's before bed, put a note on your nightstand. The more you see it, the more you start to believe it. The book even says to carry a card with you, with I am not sick written on it.
Like a little anxiety buster. You could pull it out at a party or a meeting when things start to feel overwhelming.
Exactly. It's a way to ground yourself, to remind yourself that you're not sick, that anxiety is not in control.
I'm starting to see how it all comes together. The phrase, the reminders, the thought stopping. It's like a multi-layered shield against anxiety.
Exactly. And the best part is anyone can do it, right? It doesn't require any special training or anything like that.
That's a huge plus.
Yeah.
But I'm curious, what about the physical symptoms of anxiety? Even if you're telling yourself, I am not sick, your body might still be freaking out.
That's true. Those physical symptoms can be really intense. The book acknowledges that and suggests using I am not sick with other techniques for managing those sensations.
Like what kind of techniques?
Things like deep breathing exercises, progressive muscle relaxation, mindfulness meditation, these can help calm your nervous system.
So it's not about ignoring those sensations, but learning to, ride them out.
Exactly. And the book says the more you practice this, the easier it gets. Your body learns to associate those physical sensations with safety, not danger.
Makes sense. If nothing bad happens, your brain realizes it's not actually a threat.
Right. And the book also encourages using I am not sick during exposure therapy. They use that for phobias and stuff.
Oh, interesting. How does that work?
Well, exposure therapy is about gradually confronting the things you're afraid of. So the card, it acts as a grounding tool. Like if someone has social anxiety and they're going to a party, they can hold the card and repeat, I am not sick.
To calm their nerves.
Yeah. It interrupts that anxiety spiral before it gets going.
You're basically telling yourself, I can do this.
Exactly. You can handle it. And the book says it's okay to feel some anxiety during those exercises. The goal isn't to eliminate anxiety completely, but to learn to manage it. It's about building that resilience.
It's changing that story from, I can't handle this, to, I can do this, even if it's tough.
Yes. And the book suggests getting loved ones involved, too. They can offer support, remind you to use the phrase, even join you for those exposure exercises.
That's a good point. It's not about doing it alone, but, changing those deep-seated beliefs, it's got to be tough.
It can be.
Yeah.
And the book has some good tips for dealing with the challenges. One of the biggest is setbacks, or those unexpected reactions.
Because even when you're trying to change, those old patterns can pop up.
They do, yeah. But the book, it reminds us that setbacks, they're normal. It's not about being perfect. It's about being persistent.
So even if you have a bad day, a day where the anxiety comes back full force, it doesn't mean you failed.
Not at all. It just means you're human. The book says to go back to basics, repeat the phrase, look at those reminders, get some exercise, reach out to someone.
Get back on track.
Right. And be kind to yourself. The book really emphasizes self-compassion. It's easy to get down on yourself, but you got to remember that change takes time.
And it's not always a straight line, right?
Exactly. There will be ups and downs. And the book says to celebrate the small wins along the way. Like maybe you were able to go to a social event that usually makes you anxious. Or maybe you handled a panic attack without completely falling apart.
Those are big wins.
They are. It's about acknowledging the progress, even if it's not always obvious to others. And it's about remembering that you are in control, not the anxiety.
I love that. You have the power to choose.
Yes. And the book acknowledges that sometimes you might need extra support, and that's okay too.
There's no shame in asking for help.
Absolutely. And the book says this method can be used alongside therapy or medication. It's about finding what works for you.
It's about having a toolbox, right? Using all the tools you have to get better.
Exactly. It's about taking charge of your mental health, and that's something we could all benefit from.
I think it's a good place to pause for now. We've covered so much, but there's still more to discuss. Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We've been on this amazing journey exploring this whole new way of thinking about anxiety.
It really is a paradigm shift, isn't it?
It is. It's about moving from managing it to actually overcoming it.
And that's a huge difference.
It is. In the last couple parts, we talked about how this I am not sick method can, change our thoughts and how we experience anxiety. But this idea that anxiety isn't a disease, that it's a learned reaction, that just keeps coming back to me.
Yeah, it's the core of this whole approach.
It really is. And I think it's so powerful because it removes, the stigma. It takes away that shame that a lot of people feel.
It does. It normalizes it in a way.
Exactly. For so long, we've been told it's a chemical imbalance, a genetic thing, something broken in us. But if it's learned, well, that means we can unlearn it, right?
That's the whole premise. It gives you back a sense of control.
It really does. It's empowering. But what about those, those really deep-seated anxiety memories? Even if we change our beliefs, those memories can still trigger us.
You're right. They can be powerful triggers. And the book, it talks about this in depth, how those memories are formed and how we can change how we relate to them.
So we've talked about memory reconsolidation before, the idea that memories can change. How does I am not sick play into that?
Well, every time you recall a memory, it becomes like malleable. You have a chance to reshape it, add new meaning. So when you repeat, I am not sick, when those memories come up, you're basically introducing a new narrative.
You're changing the story.
Exactly. You're saying, okay, this happened, but it doesn't define me. I am not sick. I can handle this.
It reminds me of that quote, between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose.
That's a great quote. This method, it's about reclaiming that space. It's about recognizing that we're not just victims of our past.
But let's be honest, change is tough, especially with something like anxiety. The book mentions transformative learning, and that sounds intense. What exactly is that?
Well, transformative learning, it's about challenging our assumptions, our beliefs, those mental models that shape how we see things. It's about changing how we view the world and ourselves.
So with anxiety, it's about transforming that belief that we're, I don't know, damaged into this understanding that we're actually strong and can heal.
That's it. In the book, it says this happens in stages, right? There's a stage of kind of disorientation where you question everything you thought you knew, then you explore new perspectives, and finally, you integrate those new beliefs.
Like a metamorphosis. A caterpillar turning into a butterfly.
I love that. And just like metamorphosis, it can be messy, uncomfortable,
Yeah.
but the end result is something beautiful.
It really is.
Yeah.
I'm also struck by how much this method emphasizes self-compassion. It's
Yeah.
not about getting angry at ourselves for having anxiety or feeling like a failure when it comes back.
No, it's about understanding. It's about being kind to ourselves.
Exactly. We're all works in progress. Change takes time. So what does the book suggest for those times when we struggle, when the anxiety feels overwhelming?
It goes back to the basics of self-care. Sleep, good food, exercise, connecting with people you love, spending time in nature, doing things you enjoy.
It sounds simple, but it's so easy to forget about that stuff when you're stressed.
It is. But the book emphasizes these aren't just luxuries, they're essential.
They're the foundation for a good life.
Exactly. This deep dive has been really insightful. I feel like we've just begun to explore this I am not sick method.
Me too. And I already see anxiety differently.
I'm so glad, and I hope our listeners do too. The takeaway here is there's hope. Anxiety doesn't have to run your life. You can choose a different path.
And you don't have to do it alone. Talk to your friends, family, a therapist, a support group. There's so much help out there.
You're right. And remember, change takes time. Be patient, celebrate those little wins, and never give up on the possibility of a life free from anxiety.
What a great message. Thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive into overcoming anxiety. We'll be back next time with another deep dive into something fascinating. Until then, keep learning, keep growing, and keep diving deep.